Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. Today I'm going to talk about why Finland breaks Americans. And I have mentioned this before in previous videos. And the reason for which I was going to do a video about this is because I was having a discussion with somebody about this yesterday, and I was like, yeah, that's a great idea for a video. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that today. And I decided that probably the easiest way to do that would be to describe what my last 24 hours in the US has looked like, and then describe what a similar type of day would look like in Finland. Okay, so let's start more so just with yesterday. I had actually had a pretty hard day on Wednesday, so waking up on Thursday, actually having had an adequate amount of sleep, I felt pretty good. However, it didn't change the fact that I had a million things I needed to get done. Rather inconveniently, Newark Airport has not been working very well since Monday, and that will probably be the case for the next several weeks. I had to figure out a way to change my flight, which was now a problem since Monday. And I spent some time talking to a secretary because I wanted to make sure that however I was going to change my flight, which, by the way, there is no other convenient way to get out of New Jersey besides Newark Airport, I needed to make sure that I wasn't going to cost the company way too much money if I was going to fly out this way and that way, needed to take an Uber, etc. So that all got handled and I was happy, but that did take almost the entire day to figure out somehow, magically. I had to call United, I had to cancel the flight, I had to call Concur, the expense system, and there's a lot of steps involved, a lot of bureaucracy, and one of the other issues right now is doctor's appointments. I've been having an issue with trying to switch my records that I pulled over from Finland to a doctor in the US, and I dropped those off at one doctor's office. They called me and told me that because some of it was cut off and they needed more documentation, that I needed to provide that. I was having a hard time providing that. They can't accept it electronically. I was having a hard time downloading it, really getting it off my work computer to my other computer and downloading it and printing it. Whatever. And so then I was trying to get in with this other doctor who I had previously seen, and as of today I finally am in with them, but it's going to be a month from now, which I don't really care. That doesn't matter so much. But I had to call them about 4 to 5 times throughout the course of the week since Wednesday, I think. Does that sound right? Maybe. Anyway, I was calling them multiple times a day. I needed them to basically accept my documents and then get some higher up approval, etc. And it took a long time and it was very annoying. Okay. And then, yesterday I was so tired also that I fell asleep. Between 5 and 6 p.m., my mom came to drop off a new rug for me and told me I really need to get off this weird sleep schedule. Then today, while I'm eating lunch, my stepmom asked me what's going on with my doctor's appointments, and I'm like, it's just a big dumpster fire mess. Are you switching doctors? It's just a big dumpster fire mess. And I'm a little bit too exhausted from all these transactions that have happened in the week to really be able to fully explain the situation the way I just did now. Essentially, it was really a lot of different things to handle that were just dumpster firing all in one place. In addition to the fact that I also work part-time at a restaurant here, and I actively avoid going out with friends because I'm worried about the financial implication of it. However, I enjoy traveling, so, for a while that was the greater priority rather than dropping $50 to $100 on a meal. So I woke up today, was not as stressed out because I had handled the flight thing, but had some other things I needed to handle. Had a higher up manager meeting with the department head where we talked about my autistic interest, which is the housing market, of course. I'm not even sure how it ended up on that topic, but it really took most of the session. And then I ate. Now I've gotten ready to go to the restaurant, and I'm going to do that in a bit and try to figure out if there's anything I need to get done this weekend work-wise, because I feel like I spent the entire week worrying about how to change one flight and deal with some annoying doctor's appointment stuff. Now, I'm going to give a similar day in Finland. Granted, this was exceptional, okay? But I'd say the fact about, actively trying to avoid friends to save money is kind of pathetic. So, let's talk about Finland. Let's talk about when I lived in Finland first, and then I'm going to talk about the similar day in Finland. When I lived in Finland, I had the opposite problem, where I didn't really know how to go to the doctors. I avoided going to the doctors. There wasn't really that much to do. I didn't have 500 credit cards. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? Credit cards aren't even really financially advantageous in Finland. So you just don't have a bunch of different things that you're managing all the time. That's what I'm trying to say. I didn't have to drive a car and pay multiple tolls to drive an hour to northern New Jersey to see some of my only friends that are still local-ish. Instead, I could just pop open a beer, walk down the street, couldn't do that in the US, show up at some student event and talk to some random people, stay there, get my social fill, go to sleep because I was tired, wake up the next day, do some work, maybe repeat that part of the evening or not. Maybe I just stay home and I cook for myself and nobody's breathing down my neck telling me I shouldn't sleep too much or I need to worry about my health. Because... drinking every day is really worrying about your health. No, just kidding. That was not really how that worked. That was more of a, twice a week thing. Okay, whatever. So, I stopped being a student, and I honestly get FOMO being in Lappeenranta and not being a student and just being like, I can't go to those things because I am a student, but PhD students are like faculty. They're not really students. So how can I be social? Well, that's still easy. I can still invite somebody to my house. I can still go to somebody's house. I can still show up at the university and have lunch with somebody. That's usually the easiest way. And I did that a lot more when I had like my full-time position in Finland as a master's thesis worker. Now, more similar to what my situation looks like now, but a little bit in reverse. Scheduling doctor's appointments in Finland is confusing. I show up in the city center. I scheduled the wrong one. They told me I scheduled the wrong one. It was in Finnish, so I was confused even though I was using Google Translate. But they're like, actually, we can probably make you an appointment here. Which they took me on the spot, helped me out in that moment. So stress-free. And then we're like, you know what? There's actually another site, the same doctor in Saamelahti where you live. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Well, that makes sense. It's near the university. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the Lappeenranta who lives in Saamelahti. And, you can just go there instead of coming all the way to the city center. I'm not really good at being on time, so there's all that. But yeah, they just helped me out. They made it so easy. And then, I worked my 9 to 5 in reverse hours, 4 to midnight. And I went to sleep and it was pretty chill. And then I probably slept in late the next day, cleaned the apartment, ate some food, went to the university, worked from there, walked, didn't need a car, didn't need to pay for gas, didn't need to pay for tolls. And I probably interacted with at least one other person just due to my own proximity with other people who also happened to be my peers. I have to go pretty out of my way to spend time with my peers here in the US, and I think that's part of why I still work at the restaurant, is because it really helps me socialize and make money at the same time, because if I was only socializing, I really know I could not afford that. So, there was nothing easier than just popping open a beer and walking down the street in Lappeenranta, but that is not an option to me here. So, all these things. When I'm in the US, my primary mode is survival, which means that I am thinking about money, I am thinking about how much things cost, I am thinking about all the things I need to get done, how I can be more productive, how I can be more aspirational, reaching more goals, working hard, the American dream, competition. These are all the things you wake up that daily, consume you. I would fit in social things kind of when I had time and very sporadically, but it definitely wasn't really a part of my life. And this wasn't just was. This is what my life looks like now. Yeah. When I'm in Finland, I have a little bit more free time. Part of it is I don't have a car there, which I deliberately don't do because it'd be expensive. And that slows down my pace of life quite a bit so that I do have time to interact with people. You also feel so incredibly lonely because if you're foreign, you probably don't work a job where you actually interact with people. You probably work a university job where you're doing research, isolated in a corner, which is naturally going to make you as a human being uncomfortable and force you to seek out human interaction, which mostly comes in the form of being with other international students. Now, where this gets tricky is you have to understand that you're probably not only interacting with international students from your own culture, you're probably interacting with international students from your all the other cultural backgrounds. And this sometimes, as I've noted, can create some sort of communication barrier, cultural misunderstandings, and inevitably lead to conflict. maybe that's just my take on it, or that was legitimately my experience. Now, bringing this discussion back to Americans, as, obviously I'm an American, and comparing it to my other American friends, I always say this, again, Finland breaks Americans. So I'm going to go through, and God forbid none of these people are watching this, all the people who, not all of them, but I'd say a portion of the people who I did my program with and kind of some of the challenges. One person ended up trying to be social. I'm going to not even label them as he or she. We'll do Han. it. Whatever it is. Okay, so one person tried to be social the first couple months, decided it wasn't working, and then decided to lock themselves in their apartment for approximately the following rest of the program because socializing was just too difficult. So let's go back to the internet. Cool. Another person was likely having panic attacks due to not feeling like they were working hard enough, the same way they do in the American setting, being productive enough, and then also simultaneously trying to take on a romantic relationship, which was new and scary. Another person was okay-ish the first year, but the second year really wasn't, to the point where they just disappeared for 2 months and went back to the US because they were no longer on Fulbright, technically, and therefore did not need to be there for the whole time. One other person was fine the entire duration of the program, however stayed there after the program ended, and then proceeded to have those weird friendship breakup fight things that I've described in other videos. And the only other person was married and was, fine, probably just due to the fact that they were married and, had a support system there. Now, in talking to one of these people I just listed, we were like, why do I feel so depressed? In fact, we were so depressed that we were like, we're just going to go on this random trip to Norway that some other people are putting together just to get the heck out of Lappeenranta in the middle of winter. And then there was a 24/7 sauna, and we were like, that's why we're going. No. Anyway, so we would take a lot of trips to kind of cope with reality. We went to Italy, Norway, where else did we go? I don't know. You would just kind of escape Lappeenranta. Lappeenranta really became a landing pad for me, where I basically just traveled to the rest of Europe from there, and that never changed even once I got my own apartment. So, people don't really have a very easy time staying in Lappeenranta, and it wasn't just me. So, anyway, and talking to this one friend, we're then discussing this phenomenon by which, why do I feel so out of sorts when I'm here? What is this feeling? And then we essentially realized that in the US, your mood is like this. In Finland, your mood is like this. And why is that the case? So when you're in the US, you're very, 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 very distracted. Let's talk about my commute, okay? When I used to commute to Rutgers, I would commute an hour in the car, and I would have other cars I'm paying attention to. Usually I'd talk on the phone. There are other stimulus happening simultaneously. And then I go into a class and there's tons of people around me. I'm continuing to be stimulated. In Finland, probably walking to the university, I may see just 3 people. Maybe I'm listening to music, probably not talking on the phone. I don't even use it. I never even had a phone. I still don't have a phone plan in Finland. I do prepaid daily because it's I'm not there enough. And then most of the time I'm on EDU roam. Yeah, but whatever. So I'm just kind of thinking about how I feel. And there's sort of this numbing, empty feeling that's happening that I'd never really experienced before in my life. And then you go home and it's dark, and it's dark most of the day, and you just feel really alone in a way that you never felt before. And so it really forces you to mitigate that uncomfortable feeling of being alone and go be with other people. But the problem is you're so desperate to be with other people that you then become super codependent on whatever person is near you that you remotely like, and then you have that great close friendship until a dumpster fires because it got too close and somebody offended the other person, and it's the unforgivable sin. So I think that it's just, there's sort of this codependency that gets built very easily for Americans living in Finland, because you don't have anybody. You don't really know how to be Finnish. You probably don't speak Finnish. You don't really need to speak Finnish because you can get by with English. Maybe you'll try to have some other international friends and that will be interesting, but they're not really going to be able to relate to you as much because, first off, to be an American who even ends up in Finland, you're probably rather ambitious, which means that, no offense, but you really can't relate to the majority of Finnish people because these people were not conditioned from birth to compete with each other. As my one Finnish friend said, and I repeat this one quite a few times on here, from a young age, you guys are taught to compete with each other. From a young age, we are taught to work together. So you're essentially coming from a completely different culture. You're trying to assimilate to this other culture. It's like the same but different, and you're kind of confused. And you're not used to not having the daily stresses, not even just in the form of money, but in the form of external stimulus that you would have in the US, going to a place like Finland where it is a lot more low-key and quiet. You've probably never been in a place where there are so many hours of darkness, yet so many hours of light when the springtime comes, and that kind of also messes with your ability to mood regulate. You can't really spend a lot of time outside because it's too cold. You probably don't know how to cross-country ski. Good luck if you get your hands on a pair of one of those and then try to figure it out yourself. Maybe you can go to the gym, but you just have to understand that you are entirely uprooting everything that you know in your life to be normal and constant and true, and throwing yourself into this environment that even makes local people who have grown up there their entire lives depressed. I remember talking to one Finnish girl and her explaining to me that, yeah, every winter, it's hard for us too. It's almost like even though you've gone through this your entire life, it's still so hard and you forget about it. Like, you forget how hard it is every single year until it actually happens again. So the weather is definitely one thing. I think the struggle slash somewhat inability to culturally adapt due to a language barrier and, due to an overall cultural barrier, you have to keep in mind that there's this level of Americans being very pushy almost that is a little bit off-putting most likely to Finnish people, and they'd be a little bit afraid to get to know you. Also, you're taught to be a lot more superficial in your interactions, whereas Finns don't really do that. And so you're just coming in as like this alien who people just don't see you. Like, I really hate to say this, and I kind of wonder how many Finnish people are going to agree with me, but it's like, there are moments when I really feel like Finnish people don't always see international people as human. And I know that that's like a very, like, what the heck kind of statement is that? But it's just a lot more like, I mean, no, of course it's like you're a person and you're there, but there is really such a disparity between the local population and the foreign population, because you have to keep in mind that Finland has been a very homogenous society for like so much of the time that it's existed. And this for people is, who are Finnish, it's like they don't know what to do with you as much as you're like, I'm in another culture and I don't even know what to do half the time. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's really like a very complicated discussion that intermingles societal and cultural and linguistic and geographical and climate, all these different types of factors together to make it very difficult for somebody who is coming from another country to be able to deal with this kind of situation, right? Like, you don't have people moving in mass to immigrate to Finland to go live there. Yes, it has a very high standard of living. Yes, it has a very good social safety net. Yes, it has arguably good education on the world scene. However, the climate is really enough to get people to not want to go there. And the rather xenophobic attitude for being part of the Western world, in my opinion, is also pretty undesirable for anybody looking to immigrate to Finland long term. One of the biggest discussions in the international community in Finland is around how to get employment. And I will admit that although I did have employment in Finland, it was not easy to come by. Now, I'm not saying that employment in the US is much, much easier to come by, but having any job in Finland is difficult to come by compared to the US. If I came to the US with no English and I wanted to go work in a kitchen washing dishes, I could do that. Unfortunately, in Finland, that's likely not the same case. I would at least need to speak English, and in which event, as I've already mentioned multiple times, working at McDonald's in Lappeenranta was really the only option that I could find for that. I'm sure there are others, but that was the only one that I became aware of personally. And yes, while I'm American and I am a native English speaker, maybe in some ways it would have been easier for me to find a job. But at the same time, I probably would have had to relocate to Helsinki, which is really still not something that is ever going to be on my radar. So I probably want to stay affiliated with the university in some capacity, do a postdoc. That could work. Yeah, and that would be great. I would love that. Yeah, so... And eventually I would need to learn Finnish, and I would hope I learn Finnish well enough that people kind of forget that I'm not Finnish. Although I have my weird Russian accent, so... Yeah, I need to make a video of me speaking in Finnish so people understand how bad my accent is, because it's very funny. But yeah, so essentially, you're just, like, taken out of your environment and you feel really weird. Like, the kinds of psychological crises I had in Finland were not the same as ones I had in Kyrgyzstan. I would say and Romania, but I was there for too short. In Kyrgyzstan, I wanted to go home because I was sick of living in a developing country, because that was another thing that I did not grow up living in, and at a point that became very emotionally taxing. While that was not the challenge I was facing in Finland, I would say being confronted with the fact that I had some dormant mental health challenges that simply got activated when I went to Finland, and to be honest, I don't think I've ever been the same since this experience. I think it taught me a lot about my susceptibilities for codependency in relationships, for things that can go wrong, for unhealthy patterns that I have, and, not really understanding that being kind to others is important. I'm not saying on my behalf, but understanding that I should not accept that behavior. Because you're desperate, right? It's like beggars can't be choosers. And it's like, if you're having a hard time connecting with people and making friends to begin with, because simply population size, you may not always be the most prudent in selecting friends who would, be beneficial for your mental well-being. I'll put it that way. So I just felt like I unintentionally got involved in a lot of relationships and friendships and all that I wish I hadn't, like, retrospectively. Wish I could, like, go back in time and tell myself to just avoid some of these people. But that's not how life works. So, yeah. And in the US, it's pretty easy. I'm busy. I'm working. I'm always working. So, like, I don't have to see people I don't want to see. And in Finland, I would have to learn how to have better boundaries around, hey, I just don't want to see you. Which is low-key why I keep my US job and why I go and I work there, because then people can't see me and I can't repeat these problems. If you thought that I didn't do that on purpose, then you don't know me very well. No. So, yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I think it's a lot of factors, and it's like the experience of somebody having a hard time, feeling lonely, feeling isolated, wanting to go back to the US, not feeling distracted enough, feeling their sad feelings way too intensely. However, I will tell you that there is not a greater place in the world where I've experienced more joy than being in Finland. Why? Because even though there were a lot of bad parts of having those really codependent relationships and conflicts and whatever, it's also really like the closest I ever felt to anybody and felt like a true sense of friendship in some way. So it's a double-edged sword. Like a lot of things, it's a catch-22, really good and really bad. I feel like in the US, we're just kind of chilling at baseline, stressing out about things that don't really matter, like money, but that we're not going to figure out until we're old and we're one of these people on YouTube who's being interviewed as a 70-year-old, giving advice on how they wish that they would have spent more time with their family and been less obsessed with this or that or whatever other regrets they have in life. But it is what it is, and sometimes it's like, you can't unknow what you know. It's a terrible way to compare it, but it just reminds me of, like, the Adam and Eve story in the Bible, where it's like Eve really just had to know what that fruit was like, and, sometimes it just feels like Finland was that fruit, and I'm like, I could have gone my whole life pretty happily without knowing what was on the other side of that fruit, and I'll never be able to unknow it. And in one way, I'm kind of permanently scarred, but in another way, I'm like relieved that I relieved my curiosity. So, what is my point of this? Do I even recommend Finland for foreign people? For Americans? If you're a masochist. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult. And believe me, there are Americans who stay there, they get jobs, they assimilate, they get married, like, get a dog. I don't know what else is pretty serious. Buy property together. I have not heard that one. But anyway, yeah, so, there are people who, like, it is for them. And the things that I like about it are, like, I did not work as much And again, it's like, I know I just said some contradictory things in here, which people love to call me out on that, but it's like, I have to learn a balance, and I have to learn, like, boundaries and, like, saying no to people. But I didn't figure that out yet, so work is still easier. Yeah, so it's hard, but if you're up for a challenge, I definitely recommend it. It's pretty notoriously difficult to get to Finland, so unless you're continuing your education with a master's degree, I'm not really sure I have any other advice for how to get over there. But again, Finland is not for the weak. That's why they have the whole sisu thing, you know, which is basically like, how do you explain sisu? It's just kind of like toughing it out. I don't know. Some Finnish person can comment below and explain what sisu is better than that. But yeah, so if you're an American and you went to Finland and you're like, why did this mess me up so bad? You just got to be like, I'm a fish and they just took me out of water, and then you're kind of going to get it. And you could go back into the water, or you could learn how to breathe on land, become like a mermaid. I don't know. It's up to you. Okay, anyway, getting too tangential with this, but I hope this made some sense, because it really felt like a lot of rambling and like way too abstract, but maybe it made some sense. So if you're an American in Finland and you're like, why am I here? Because you wanted a challenge. And if you love it and didn't have any challenges at all, good for you. But I would also probably accuse you of lying, because at the very least, the seasonal depression is real. I've said ever since I came back to Finland, I could never get seasonal depression ever again in New Jersey. That's a joke. And I used to get it. But now I'm like, no. So hang in there. And if you've come back from Finland and you're in the US and you're like, good riddance, believe me, you're not the only one who feels that way. I'm not one of those people. I kind of, sit on two chairs, as they call it in Russian. Like, I feel both good and bad things about each place. Although I feel mostly a lot of bad things about the US, to be honest. But that's a separate discussion. But again, your experience, you may think it's unique, and in some ways it is. But conceptually, you're not the only one. Until next time. Bye.